Shabbat Shalom. July 2015. There we are, my wife Noemi and I, in a fallow field in Sonoma, California, standing among beehives. We're a little warmer than we would prefer, since we're in full beekeeper garb, screened helmet, jacket, trousers to protect us from being stung. And with us is the gentle, elderly, bearded beekeeper. And he's taking off the top of one of the hives, and he is wearing exactly 0 protective equipment. Many people are surprised to learn, he explains, that bees are friendly, provided they do not feel threatened. And as he says this to us, to illustrate the point, he sticks his hand right into the hive of bees and brings out a bunch of bees. No stings. He is stung exactly 0 times over the course of our visit. This interaction with bees, so often misunderstood and feared, is testament to their gentle nature and, as I will show, their crucial role in our world. Noemi had come to interview the beekeeper for an article on the alarming and catastrophic decline in the bee population. And I am along for the ride, her unpaid intern, let's call it. The drop in bees is a crisis more significant than any geopolitical conflict facing the world today. More significant than Ukraine, more significant than Israel-Gaza, because without bees, all of us, the human race, will starve to death. Ukrainians and Russians, Israelis and Palestinians, done. And as my wife begins asking questions, the urgency of doing something about the disappearing bees and also why they're disappearing becomes painfully clear. It seems that we humans, through our behavior, are killing them off. And in the not-too-distant future, rather than hearing the gentle, friendly buzzing of the bees as the flowers come into bloom, we might find a chilling silence. This is not a crisis that can wait for tomorrow or for the next generation. It demands our immediate attention and action. For the bees are the silent heroes of our food chain. Their survival is linked to our own. No bees, no food. And Noemi and I, well, mostly Noemi, have come to Sonoma to find out why the local native bee populations are dying off. The first reason is not that surprising. The first reason is pesticide use. As far back as 1962, Rachel Carson published her book, Silent Spring, a book about the risks of pesticide use, how they cause cancer and all kinds of other things. And they also kill off a wide range of helpful insects and small animals beyond the pests that are the target of the pesticides. It is the sort of carpet bombing of the animal and insect control world. And bees are among the top of the unintended victims of pesticides. They can disrupt a bee's nervous system, impairing its ability to navigate, to forage, and to reproduce. Bees in suburban areas like here in Orange County are susceptible to dying from eating backyard produce or flowers or even lawn clover that's sprayed with pesticides. But the problem is more complex and more, more surprising than just being due to pesticides alone. It's linked to how we grow the food that comes to us, to our tables, and that we eat. Now, our Torah states that farmland needs to lie fallow during a sabbatical year. Every, how many years is the sabbatical year? How many years is the sabbatical year? You are awake. Good. Mostly. And this is to reintroduce nutrients into the soil and to promote biodiversity. And our Torah portion for this week, Behukotai, instructs us that if we don't follow the rules of respecting the land that we're farming, if we exploit the earth to the maximum, to squeeze out the absolute maximum of production of food, the earth will punish us and we will die off. And the land will lie fallow so that it can undergrow, so it can, so it can regenerate without us. Leviticus 26:23 says, throughout the time that the land is desolate, that is, there are no people on it, the land will observe the rest that it did not observe in your sabbatical years while you were dwelling on it. These words are running through my head as I sweat inside my beekeeper's helmet on that warm summer day in Sonoma. As Noemi continued questioning the beekeeper, I was horrified to learn that in addition to the use of local pesticides, industrial agriculture is significantly responsible for the collapse of the bee population. Now, I was raised with the idea in school, you get those little colorful books that show farms, very small farms, family farms with multiple crops. I thought that's how farming was done. I was wrong. Who here has driven up the 5 to San Francisco or through the Salinas Valley? Monocropping. Look at that. Monocropping. So rather than a patchwork of small farms with local beehives that are able to feed off diverse different types of flowers and food, you get thousands or sometimes tens of thousands of acres of the same crop. Now, while we're standing there in this field, the wizened old beekeeper explains, the thing about monocropping is different regions of the country, they have different kinds of food that grow really well. There are blueberries in one area and strawberries in another area and almonds in another area. And all these monocrops, they need to be pollinated at a different time of year. So what you end up with are essentially thousands and thousands of beehives being loaded into semi-trucks and driven across the country, dropped off in California to pollinate almonds, and then loaded at the end of that season into the truck again and driven back across the country somewhere else to pollinate soybeans or other types of crops. So the bees are constantly on the move. How many of you would like to travel in the back of a semi-truck across the country over and over and over again? Not a lot of you, probably. Neither do bees, it turns out. And a lot of them die as they're going from place to place. Now, in order to they're an investment. They create inexpensive honey. To do it this way, you get kind of a monocrop of bees as well. And you can get honey. You've seen like acacia honey and there's different types of monocrop honey. It's a good investment. So they're treated with all kinds of medications to keep them alive. There's lots of things that like to, parasites and things that attack bees and different diseases that they get. So they're given medicine that makes these bees slightly resistant to these diseases, enough to keep them partially alive. But at the same time, their honey is cleared out. Now, bees, when they produce honey, they create a certain amount of excess honey that, according to traditional beekeeping, can be harvested without hurting the bees. But, just like with the fields, they're maximally exploited. And so all or as much of the honey as possible is taken out and it's replaced with sugar water. I heard an ah, that's right. The sugar water is worse than eating only one type of food, which we humans can't do and neither can bees, because sugar water lacks most of the nutrients that the bee needs to actually cure itself of its diseases fully. And so it's the perfect storm for a rolling beehive fleet carrying disease from one area of the country to the next. It is the ultimate rolling super spreader event for bees. When the bee trucks roll into town, not only do the visiting bees take all of the food of the native bees, they overwhelm them, but they also introduce all kinds of diseases. Not ideal. Traditionally, bees in the Mishnah is written around 200. Beehives in the Mishnah, they can be either up on pegs or they can be actually kind of cemented to the floor, but you have to move them within a limited area. You can't, there's not an idea of monocropping in traditional agriculture. It's fairly recent. And one of the things about monocropping, remember those pesticides I mentioned earlier? Those are used in monocropping, and those kill off any other forage that those bees might pick up in between the rows of crops. So you have the worst possible situation of disease-ridden bees that die partially as they go across the country and introduce disease into the local bee population as they move. I'm often surprised. I shouldn't be surprised, I'm a rabbi. I'm happy to say I often find that the Talmud has relevant lessons. And in the Bavli, in the Babylonian Talmud, in Sota, on page 48b, for those of you keeping track, says that bees collect honey over a wide area. They need all kinds of plants in order to make a good honey. So we're standing in this field and the beekeeper is explaining to us as the interview draws to a close that he's attempting to reintroduce traditional beekeeping methods. He's got lots of fields of wildflowers, and he's got a few beehives that are there, sedentary on the land, and the bees collect from only that area around, and they have a varied diet, and they're pretty healthy, and he only harvests enough honey, the excess honey, so the bees have enough honey to live off of, and the bees are happy, and he's happy. It was only some years later when I visited an industrial bee rolling beehive company that I saw what angry bees look like, bees that do sting you. So as the interview wraps up, off the record, we kind of ask, what can we do? And most of you are probably wondering, what can we do? Here's what we can do. Firstly, if we have our own garden, try to avoid harsh chemical pesticides. Okay, that seems, based on what I've said, reasonably obvious, but it does lead to certain inconveniences. So let's say you don't want to do that. Second thing you can do. This is America, so we vote with our votes and we vote with our dollars. And when we buy certain things and we choose not to buy other things, the company must respond by adapting. So here's what we can do. As often as possible, we can try to buy organic certified produce. Why? Because in that case, the crops, even the monocrops, are not sprayed with the same harsh chemical pesticides. The bees are not a kind of rolling, problematic disease swarm. And if we do that, if we increase demand, economics majors, the companies must increase supply. Very good. So in those two ways, we can be active consumers and contributors to the preservation of the bee population. But what if you are a super Jew? What if you want to do this in the most delicious and the most biblically appropriate way possible? Does anybody know what I'm going to say? Anybody want to guess? Yes. That's a good idea. I don't own a field, but if I did, I would do that. What I'm going to suggest is this. Switch from bee honey to date honey. Demand for low-cost bee honey is what drives the part of this whole truck business. And if you switch to date honey, it takes the profit motive out of it. Additionally, you can get very good Israeli date honey. Why does Israel produce date honey, you may ask? Correct. It is When the Torah says the land of milk and honey, it is referring to the land of goat milk and date honey, because bee honey was not cultivated until much later on. So you can enjoy, and you can get extra mitzvah points at all those Jewish holidays, at Rosh Hashanah and throughout the year, and at weddings and so on, by buying date honey. It's a win, win, win. So if we as a collective want a future where, with the gentle buzzing of bees in our gardens and enough food on our tables, each of us have to do our bit. And if we take this responsibility seriously, if we're willing to change our buying patterns a little bit, then the generations to come will still know the sweetness of honey and the joy of watching cheerful honeybees fly from flower to flower. B'tei Avon, bon appetit, and Shabbat Shalom.